Good morning, everybody. So nice to have the podium back. David went. We moved it out when Brent was singing, and David went without the podium, and I was nervous. I was like, I gotta have the podium, because if it goes bad, I'm crawling right down there. And so I'm not quite ready to go without the podium yet. If I'm doing good, maybe I'll step out once or twice. But glad to have it back. One of the neat things about the way we rotate and take turns in the pulpit here at the Way is that usually you get several weeks before it's your turn again. So you've got several weeks to prepare for our next turn. And for me, that's a good thing because I don't know if I could do it every single week or not. And so my process goes kind of like this. First, I kind of wait for lightning to strike. I got to get an idea of what it is I'm going to do. And sometimes it takes days. Sometimes it takes weeks. Sometimes I get hit with 2 or 3 things at once, and I make a little note that I want to do. It usually happens for me when I'm like doing a devotional, or I'm reading the Word, or I'm listening to Christian radio, or something like that is usually kind of what happens. But my topic for today kind of came to me from a story that I heard on the radio. And the story was about Billy Graham. And it was somebody quoting a story that Billy Graham told. It was several years ago, but it was when Billy Graham was a very famous preacher, had been for years, and he was driving in his hometown, and he was speeding. And he gets pulled over, and he gets a speeding ticket. He was like 12 or 13 over the limit. He got the ticket, and like a diligent person, he goes to traffic court, and the judge immediately recognizes this is Billy Graham. And Billy Graham, the judge, was a devout Christian man and thought the world of Billy Graham. And the judge asked him, Mr. Graham, were you doing this? And he said, well, yeah, I was. It just kind of got away from me. I looked down, I was about 10 or 12 miles over the limit. And so the judge said, well, you're guilty, so I have to fine you, but I'm going to pay your fine. And also, I want to take you out to a steak dinner tonight. And Billy Graham later equated that to the grace of God. Do you see the parallel? We're guilty. We're guilty of the crime. But our fine has been paid for us, and we receive a reward that we don't deserve. And so he equated that. So that got me thinking about God's grace. So I want to talk about grace this morning, and which I think is just like the greatest gift. The greatest gift is the grace of God. So let's look further into the subject of grace. How are we going to define grace? There's it's used in a lot of different ways, the word grace is. Sometimes it's used to discuss elegance of movement. The dancer moved with a flowing grace. That's not used very often to describe me. But I was one of those football linemen bang into things, people, and bull in a china closet. But we do use that term the way some people, I think of an athlete at the top of their sport and how graceful they are to walk. But that's not the definition that I'm after this morning. Could be described doing honor by your presence. You guys right now are gracing me with your presence. And you're doing me honor, and I thank you for that. But that's not the way I want to talk about it either. Could be a pre-meal prayer. Please say grace before we eat. And that's fine, that's great, but that's not what I'm talking about. How about this one? Grace, the free and unmerited favor of God, as manifested in the salvation of sinners and the bestowal of blessings. I'll read that one more time. The free and unmerited favor of God, as manifested in the salvation of sinners and the bestowal of blessings. Now to me, I want to break it down. There's 4 key words, and that's a pretty long definition. There's 4 key words: free, unmerited, salvation, and blessings. Those are kind of the important words in there. Free, well, it costs nothing. In fact, there's nothing that you can do to earn it. You can't afford real estate in heaven. There's no way we could ever pay for it. There's no way we could earn something that good. I mean, a piece of heaven. It's given to us. It's free. Unmerited. We don't deserve it. Whenever I was helping Riley and then Jack look for college scholarship money, I found out there's 2 kinds of scholarship money. First is called merit-based. And you get that because of what you can do. You're either smart or you can play a sport. You have something that college wants, and it's based on your personal merit. And the other kind is called need-based, meaning you really need it because your family income is low enough, or your parents have 14 kids, or some other limiting condition, so that there is no way you can go to college without it. The grace of God is need-based. It is grace and mercy given to us by God because He wants us to have it. Not because of anything that we were able to do to earn it. He's doing it for us. Okay, back to those 4 words. 3, salvation. That's the biggest reward from God's grace. Even though we were sinners and we can never completely stop sinning. I stopped for a second. Oh. There's one right there. No, I'm kidding. We are still given a share in the divine kingdom of God. Once again, not because we earned it, but because He is God. And He loves us, and He wants His children to have it. And God doesn't have grandchildren. He has children. You need to have your own relationship. You don't say, oh, my mama was a good Christian lady. Well, good. Follow suit. It needs to be your relationship with God. And number 4, the word is blessings. This is the grace of God that's given to us daily. We just listened a couple weeks ago to David give us a sermon about all the blessings that have come on our little church in a year. We're blessed daily, from the food that's in our bellies to the roofs that are over our heads to how many things we're blessed. Blessings come big and blessings come small. Anybody ever had just a nice little blessing that just made your day? I was reading a article, I think there's a book about it, and the term the guy used was God winks, where God just winks at you. Several years ago, it was a cold morning, kind of like it's been, but it was clear, it was crystal clear, it was dark. I was still driving to Dallas to go to work, so that's how long ago it was. And we were living in Howe. And I stepped out on my patio, and I mean every star in the heavens was so bright. And I just looked up at it, and I just said, wow, God, thank you for this great day. And at that exact moment, a shooting star went, whoosh. It's a God wink. It was a God wink. He just winked at me. I've done that since, and it didn't happen again, but but at that moment, it did. So it might be little things. It might be little things, it might be big things, but the truth of the matter is, I've never really known anyone who earnestly sought God and did not find Him. If you earnestly seek Him, He wants us to seek Him. Seeking Him could be many different ways. For you, it might be different than for me. It might be you seek Him by opening up the Bible and reading, and that's certainly a good way to do that. It might be through prayer. And some people say, I don't know how to pray. Well, just talk to God. Just talk to Him. He wants you. He made you. He knows what your thinking is anyway. Seek Him and see if you don't find Him. So His blessings are big and His blessings are small. And as I was preparing this, I realized something about the grace of God. It's a double-edged sword. The grace of God is both getting what we don't deserve and not getting what we do deserve. Have you ever had a situation where you got lucky and you didn't get what you deserved? When I was a kid, we had this basketball goal, our house in Abilene, and it was mounted up above the garage door. And our garage door it was one of the old style, and it had a bunch of little glass windows that went across the top. It had like 6 of them. My dad had told me lots of times, if you're shooting baskets, raise the garage door. This is way before the click and raise. You had to raise that garage door. Well, didn't do it. Basketball went through the window, busted about half of it out. It's hanging there. I knew I was going to be in trouble. So I raised it, I went inside. Dad comes home from a hard day at work, and he pulls it down really hard. And it hits really hard. Bam! And when it does, another piece of that glass fell out. My dad said, "Oh man, I broke the window." And I said, "Well, let me help you clean it up, Dad." I told him years later. I did not get what I deserved. Did not get what I deserved. I got lucky. Well, with God's grace, you can get lucky just by asking. Just by asking for it, you can get lucky. So let's take a look at the parable of the prodigal son. Talk about receiving God's grace. So I'm going to turn to Luke. I'm not going to turn, I'm going to punch on this thing. To Luke chapter 15, verse 11. And I'm going to read a little bit, if I can make it work. So I'm in Luke 15, and I'm going to read 11 through 32. And he said, there was a man, this is Jesus talking, by the way. There was a man who had 2 sons. And the younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the share of property that is coming to me." And he divided his property between them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all that he had, and he took a journey into a far country. And there he squandered his property in reckless living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and he hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his fields to feed pigs. And he was longing to be fed the pods that the pigs ate. No one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread? But I perish here with hunger. I will arise, go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants.' And he arose and he came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this is my son. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and found.' And they began to celebrate. Now his older brother was in the field, and he came and drew near to the house. He heard the music and the dancing, and he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he has received him back safe and sound.' But he was angry, and he refused to go in. His father came out and entreated him. But he answered his father, 'Look, These many years I have served you, and I never disobeyed your command, yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him. And he said to him, Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It is fitting to celebrate and be glad, for this your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found. Now there's a lot of lessons in this story. Theologians kind of argue if the son represents a Christian who has backslidden or a lost person who has never accepted Christ in the first place. I kind of lean that way. But I also recognize that sometimes when I read a passage of the Bible, it is meaningful in one way to me. And then when I read it a little while later, it's meaningful in another way. It might very well be for both. It might very well be for both sets of those people. So one thing is evident, and that's God's grace. The father in the story represents God. The son doesn't get what he deserves. He gets a reward that he didn't deserve. In fact, the father rejoices in his return. The father was looking for him. He saw him coming a long way off. He had lost his son and he wanted his son. Now, typically a Jewish son would receive his inheritance at the time of his father's death. The fact that the younger brother wanted his early showed kind of a rebellious and a proud disregard for his father's authority, not to mention a selfish and an immature attitude. Maybe we should look in the mirror sometimes about having that attitude. There was a time in my life, earlier, younger days, when pretty much the only time I prayed was to ask for something. And that was the extent of my prayer life. I was a believer. That part was real, but I just wasn't in tune with God. And I've told you guys before when I spent a couple of months praying for a motorcycle. And every time I got close, something went wrong and I had to spend some money. And basically God was saying no. Now Meredith just says no, so it's it's kind of, same deal. She said you can have one when all the kids are out of the house. And I said, yeah, then I'm going to get like a hover round. So anyway, I won't be able to. It's just not as cool looking when you're bald and fat. But anyway. So anyway. It does sound a lot like us, though. It does sound a lot like us. We squander, and we're not appreciative sometimes of the blessings that we do have. Our God's grace is so great that He waits patiently to redeem us when we come to Him. We need to come with humble hearts. But when we do, He offers us the rewards of His kingdom, and He doesn't dwell on our past sin. It's like in the old days, some of you who are as old as me, and you had real blackboards in school with real chalk, and like at the end of the week they would wash them, and you'd think, wow, it's so clean and brand. Then the dust of the week would get on you and get bad. But that's what He does for us. You're washed clean. You're a new slate, ready for new things to be written on you, ready to do more learning for God. So His grace is so great that He sent a Savior to pay our debt. John 3:16, it's a lot of people's favorite verse. It's one of the first verses you memorize sometimes in Sunday school or vacation Bible school or whatever the different equivalents that the different religions are. But, God so loved the world that He sent His only Son, so that whoever believes in Him shall not perish, but will have everlasting life. Don't get caught up on the familiarity of that verse and forget what it says, because it says a lot. It says a lot. So, this is kind of contrary this grace of God thing is kind of contrary to our human thinking. You know, on earth, our earthly wisdom says you get what you earn. You get what you work for. You get what you pay for. And there's nothing wrong with that on earth. That's a good, hardworking philosophy here on earth. But don't make the mistake of relating to God the same way that you relate to earthly possessions. Because He's so much more than that. God doesn't relate to us on the scale of our goodness, thank goodness. He relates to us on the basis of His perfect grace. God is so loving, He puts on a merciful face when He looks at my failures. And He looks at my flaws and He looks at my sins. Thank goodness He does. Because there's a lot of them. There's a lot of them to see. And that's what grace is. Without grace, we can't know God. Without grace, we can't understand God. Without grace, we can't relate to God. And without grace, we can't reach God. It's the step, it's the bridge, it's the thing that He has done to allow us to approach Him. And He likes it when we approach Him. And that's why He did it for us. Justice is getting what you deserve. Mercy is not getting what you deserve. We should be very thankful that we have been shown mercy instead of justice. I'd like to look at Luke 23, verse 39. Take me a minute to get there. All right. Luke 23:39. This is the thief on the cross. One of the criminals, so they're hanging there. They're hanging on the cross. Jesus and two despicable criminals. One of the criminals who were hanged railed at Him, saying, "Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us." You notice he gets that "and us" in there. But the other rebuked Him, saying, "Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we are receiving the due reward of our deeds, but this man has done nothing wrong." And He said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And He said to him, "Truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." I kind of can relate to that thief on the cross. At the last moment, after all else was lost, he turned to Jesus and he still was saved. Isn't that fantastic? Some people don't feel worthy. "Oh man, I'm bad. I don't deserve it." None of us do. None of us do. There is no sin you can commit that He can't forgive except the sin of rejecting Him and never coming to Him. We sang, at my request, I'm not going to go, Dylan said, "Hey, you should say, wow, it's such a coincidence we sang Amazing Grace this morning." But no, I asked for it. And that's one of the most popular hymns. I read an estimate that it's sung 100,000 times a week right now. And it was written over 250 years ago by a man that had truly experienced the grace of God. And that line, "that saved a wretch like me," that's very true. That was no lie. If you read a little bit about John Newton was a slave ship captain. His mother had died when he was 7. His mother had been a religious woman, and he had just a hint of a memory of Jesus. Then his father was bad. He was a bad, abusive father. And sold him out to ships and ship's boys. But he fought tooth and nail and rose up to be a slave ship captain. And the slave ships, that was the worst of the worst. The atrocities. They were doing good if they could deliver half the cargo alive, because about half of them would die, and they didn't really care. But he had led a despicable life. He had terrible crimes committed both against him, and he had committed terrible crimes upon others. He wasn't born that way, he was made that way. But one night, he was in an awful storm. Looked like all was lost. And he remembered his mother. And he remembered her God. And he cried out, and the exact words that he cried out, they weren't anything poetic or great. He said, "Lord, have mercy on us." And almost instantly, a load in the bottom of the ship shifted. And the ship began to steer a little bit better. And then a few minutes after that, the storm began to subside. And they made it through it. Later, in his cabin, he reflected on these events. And he concluded that God had addressed him directly through the storm. Have you ever been addressed by God through a storm? Because it can happen. And he celebrated that day, May the 10th, for the rest of his life as his day of conversion. He didn't stop he did. He stopped at that point becoming a worse person, and he began to become a better one. It was an incline. He didn't instantly become a minister. The timeline went something like this. Immediately he started treating the Africans he hauled humanely. And his survival rate of his captures went to 95%. I don't know if that's really a good thing, but that was the first step. He began to study Scripture and educate himself. Then he had a moral problem with his job, and he quit being a slave ship captain because he knew he couldn't do that anymore. Then he found a Christian wife. He said God gave her to him. Then he educated himself further. Then he became a minister. 15 to 20 years after that storm, he wrote Amazing Grace. He wrote hundreds of hymns. Spent the rest of his life as an anti-slavery activist and a minister. The grace of God. Through many dangers, toils, and snares I have already come. 'Twas grace that brought me safe this far, and grace will lead me home. It was true 2,000 years ago, it was true 250 years ago, and it's true today. Grace will lead you home. Matt Chandler says, without a heart transformed by the grace of Christ, we just continue to manage internal and external darkness. Boy, that's true, isn't it? Sometimes our darkness comes internal from ourselves, and sometimes the darkness that we have to manage comes from the world. But without the grace of Christ, we're stuck as managing it. And if we have the grace of Christ, we don't need that. We have the solution. Grace is available to each of us every day. Our spiritual daily bread is the grace of God. How lucky are we? Our God wants us to seek Him. His love, mercy, and grace are right there waiting for us. When I was 15 years old, I wrote a song. And I'm not going to sing it for you today. But the lyrics to the chorus, very simplistic, but very true, and they go like this. All you got to do is ask. All you got to do is ask. Jesus forgave me, He loved me, and He saved me. And all you got to do is ask. I think it's theologically pretty good. Ask and you will receive grace. Seek and you will find grace. So where do I end such a big subject? Well, I'm going to end it where many of you started today when you came in. Take a look at your bulletin at the front of your bulletin. Mel did a wonderful job putting that on there. Isn't it pretty? It's way prettier than I thought it would be. Hebrews 4:16. Let us come boldly to the throne of our gracious God. There we will receive His mercy and we will find grace to help us when we need it most. That's a good verse. I think I will end with that.